Why did the New York Times editorial page raise questions about the Department of Education the very year it came into existence? Let me tell you about it. I'm Jenna. This is Smarter News. We're continuing to follow the story about the future of the Department of Education in America. Last week, President Trump had this to say when he argued it should be dissolved.
When President Carter created the Federal Education Department in 1979, it was opposed by members of his own cabinet, as well as the American Federation of Teachers, the New York Times editorial board, and the famed Democrat Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. History has proven them right, absolutely right.
This got me thinking, what did the New York Times actually say about the Department of Education? Clearly, the president is mentioning it because the New York Times tends to lean more liberal and is more critical of conservative causes and platforms. So he's mentioning it to underscore his assertion that many have disagreed with an independent Department of Education throughout the years. It's not just him, it's not just Republicans, it's not just this administration. So I went looking. I was curious about what I might find. And here's what I landed upon. It's an editorial written on January 16th, 1979. Now, later that year, President Carter would make the Department of Education official, signing it into law as an independent Department of Education in America. This editorial is entitled An Illusion of Education Reform. And this is what the New York Times editorial board wrote about this. And this is a quote: "A separate Department of Education would provide merely the illusion of reform." End quote. The editorial board worried about a few different things, wondering why would an independent Department of Education be more effective? Would it solve problems or would it create more? Listen to this. I'm directly quoting from the editorial here. Quote, "Even more worrisome would be the intimate relationship that might develop between a separate education department and the National Education Association. The NEA represents the professional public school establishment, a vital part of education, but still only a part. It is committed to a much larger federal role in school financing than is compatible with the tradition of state and local responsibility." End quote. So what is the NEA? The National Education Association is one of the nation's largest labor unions. So here the New York Times is raising some concerns about keeping union power somewhat at bay and a question about funding and what does this all look like. The reason why I'm mentioning this and why I do think it matters is, one, it's just evidence that ideas do change over the years. And number two, it reminds us that there was a time before the Department of Education. It's just hard to remember for many of us because it wasn't our reality. Bridget, one of our Scoop insiders here at Smarter News, sent in this question, and I thought it would be a question that many of you have also had. So let's take a listen.
Hi, Jenna. It's Bridget from Kentucky. And first of all, just want to thank you so much for what you do. I only go to you for my news, and I never leave feeling frustrated or angry with anyone. My question has to do with the closing of different agencies like the Department of Education. I have lots of friends who are posting things about kids are going to lose their lunches, teachers are going to be fired, libraries are going to be closed, and I'm not so sure that's going to happen. I feel like this administration was very adamant that education needed to be stepped up and all of that kind of thing, but I'm just wondering how that money now is going to get that money to the different schools.
This is a really great question. And the reality is federal funding in your school district versus your friends can look drastically different. It can even look different within the same district. Here's what Secretary McMahon, the current Secretary of the Department of Education, just said about funding. She just did this interview on Sunday, and she's explaining that the money that's available to schools for certain programs would not evaporate, that it would just be distributed from a different source. Let's take a listen.
A lot of the funding that goes into states now goes with a lot of red tape, a lot of strings attached to it. And so governors and state superintendents of education have said, look, if we have the funding coming in which allows us to be more creative, how can we spend that? The president believes, as I do, that the best education is that's closest to the students. And I want to look at some of the states that have been incredibly great over the last couple of years, like Louisiana. Their NAEP score showed that they had improved the most of any states. Those were programs that were put in place by the governors, by the superintendent of education, not having anything to do with the Department of Education in Washington. So what we need to do is to make sure that the funding has a clear path, the funding continues, but that the states are allowed to spend the money where they need to spend it, to hire teachers, increase their salaries, make sure that our students with special needs are taken care of. And that's what we want to make sure that happens.
Now, this is the theory. How it's done and how Congress is involved remains completely to be determined. We're going to take a look at what's possible. Isn't the question here not necessarily a political one, but how do we create a better education for future generations of Americans? The Department of Education or not, because we've clearly had both already. How can we all be happier with the education that we provide young people? Also thinking about this in this day and age after the pandemic, when you've had a lot of families seek alternatives like homeschools, what should we consider? What have we learned? What should we keep? What should we do away with? There's a lot of big questions here that can be really fascinating. And maybe there is an opportunity for new ideas. So yes, there's the consideration of dissolving the Department of Education and redistributing funds. But is this also an opportunity for all sides to weigh in and create something better? Maybe I'm too optimistic. I'm curious your thoughts. You can email us like Bridget did. You can send us a voice memo, and that's just at hello@smarternews.com. I always look forward to hearing from you. And this would be very helpful in our reporting because this is a big story and the future is uncertain. So in the meantime, I'll let you think about that. We'll get back to some of the big headlines this week. Thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News. Have a great day.